All right, in this lesson, we're going to look at the indirect method once again through an example. Specifically, we are looking at an indirect method and following this example through the journal entry to the operating section of the statement of cash flows. So let's get started by looking at the actual example and then walking you through our 4 steps that we have specifically for this type of problem. So let's take a look here. Suppose that your company sells services for $325 in cash this month. Your company also pays $100 in wages, which includes $15 that was from last month, $85 from this month, for a total of $100. So we've got 4 parts here, or 4 steps in creating the operating section. Step number 1, or part number 1, is we're going to show the journal entry to record these transactions. Part number 2 is we're going to identify the amount that should be reported as net cash flows from operating activities. So we're going to look at, if we were just looking at this from a direct method, how much cash will we have at the end of the day from these transactions? Then part 3, we're going to look at the net income. What would net income be if we were just following the accrual rules? And then part 4 here, we're going to show how the indirect method would convert net income to net cash flows from, and then that would be the operating activities section. So part 1 here, show the journal entries to record these transactions. So let's start first with the sale of services. So we received cash of $325. And how do we receive it, or why do we receive it? We received it because we provided, it looks like, a service. So service revenue would be our credit. So we're going to debit cash for $325, and we're going to credit service revenue in the amount of $325. So that would be our journal entry for the first part of this problem. The second part of this problem is our wages example. So we know that cash will go out. We know that $100 of cash went out. So we're going to credit cash for $100. And then the question is, what makes up this cash? Well, we know that $85 is from wages and salaries expense for this period. So we're going to debit wages and salaries expense. And we know that $85 went to wages and salaries expense. So the question is, what happened to the other 15? Well, the other 15, as the problem said, is for wages and salaries expenses incurred last period that got paid this period. So we're going to debit wages and salaries payable to zero out our payables and not necessarily an expense. Okay, so that's what our journal entries would look like. Now we're going to go to part 2. In part 2, we are going to take a look at what would the net cash flow from operating activities look like. So let's take a look here. So here's our journal entries once again. And so the question really is, how much cash would we have? Well, if we just look at our cash transactions, we would know that we had $325 of cash in, so $325 in, and then we had cash out of $100. So we're going to subtract $100, which would give us $225. So at the end of the day, our operating section for our net cash flows should be $225. Right? Now, what about our net income? So if we're looking at our transactions here, we're looking only for revenues and expenses. So we have revenues here of $325. So we'll put $325, and we're going to subtract from that expenses. If you notice here, we only have one expense. We have wages expense of $85. So we'll subtract $85 and we get $240. So notice that we have a $15 difference here. Why do we have a $15 difference? We have a $15 difference because we actually had to pay more cash out now for expenses that were incurred in a prior period. Okay, so the salaries and wages payable went down by $15. Because it went down by $15, we would subtract 15 from net income to get our cash from operating activities. So that's kind of how we put together our operating activities section to the statement of cash flows. So now that we have this, we go to part 4. Part 4 is to actually prepare the statement of cash flows. So the operating section. So we always start with net income. So we'll start with net income. And our net income is $240. And I'm just going to do it backwards here for a second. So net cash provided by operating activities we know is $225. We know it's $225 because we calculated it at $225. So we know that whatever additions or subtractions that we do here, we would have to have $15 here. Well, what causes this $15? It was a decreases in our salaries and wages payable because we paid more wages because we paid our payables off of $15. We had more cash go out than the actual expenses for the period because the actual expenses were $85, but we paid $100 towards salaries and wages for our employees. Why? 15 was from last year, which the expense would have incurred last year, and 85 this year. So in this case, it's a subtraction of a decrease in wages payable. Okay. So that would be our operating section indirect method for the statement of cash flows. And the reason why we're subtracting a decrease in wages payable is because we spent $15 more in cash, or we used $15 more in cash to get rid of that payable in addition to the $85 of wages and salaries expense that we incurred for this period. So that's why we're going to subtract 15. And again, that's how we do our operating activities section. So again, the key reason to doing this problem is to help you really understand the difference between our net income and then our cash flows, and how do we get there? How do we get down to $225? It's because we had $15 of additional cash paid out for wages and salaries that we expensed last year and not this year. So that's a look at this indirect walkthrough for the operating section. I hope this helps you understand a little bit why we're doing what we're doing, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find these differences in receivables and payables, and how does that affect our net income? This is why it affects our net income and why we're making adjustments to get to net cash provided by or used in our operating activities section. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. We'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure you press the like button below. And if you're looking for worksheets that go along with all of these lessons, head over to my website at patrickleemsa.com or clicking the link in the far right. And I've got your next lesson right over here. So just click that link and it'll take you to that video. So until then, we'll see you in the next lesson.